Okay, we're admitted. Hi, Tim.
Good afternoon.
And we will be on stage with you
Okay.
in about 2 minutes.
Okay, very good.
Thereabouts, but we are here.
I hear you.
How was your week?
Oh, it's pretty good. Can't complain. Well, I can't believe January's over already.
Oh, please.
Have you been able to get the vaccine for COVID?
We have had so much trouble registering. They canceled us. They told us to reschedule. So Larry was good enough to reschedule me, but it was a month later. So it was March. It was a whole big thing. We had to go down and straighten it out today, but I think we have an appointment for February 2nd.
Oh, okay. That's good.
That's good. Did you?
I'm going after Torah Study today.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Should I say mazel tov?
I'm very happy about that.
You hit it. You hit the jackpot. Yep. Where are you going to?
Well, I was able to get it. A friend of ours who works for hospice here in Chatham County. They had vaccines, and they told the employees, they said, if you know people who need it, you can put their names in, and if we have them, then we'll take them. And so she was able to get me one. So I go, at 3:10 today, I will be getting my vaccine.
Oh, that is wonderful.
Right. So, yeah, I'm very relieved. So.
I have to tell you, I enjoyed this program so much, your talk.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wish there was a way we could get a few more people to come and be involved in it, It's
at a funny time. Like, we're not on screen because we're eating.
Okay. I don't know, though. I was trying to think of what might be a better time to do it.
Services, it's fine because people have what they eat and then come.
Right.
But
I don't know if I moved it to an evening, if it would get more people, or
they're missing out. We keep telling people.
I mean,
I think that people are just getting tired of Zooming or something.
Well, I can understand that. I mean, I've read several articles where there is Zoom fatigue setting in with people. I mean, I'm going to be honest, it's not the ideal way to do things. But we have to do what we have to do right now to stay safe. So,
absolutely.
I mean, I'm grateful that we have it, but by the same token, I do wish, I would love to get back to some in-person things, but until it's practical, till we know that we can guarantee people's health, we can't do it, They're already planning that, the Seders this year, again, are going to be, virtual like we did last year.
Oh, really? Oh, that's true. It's, it's
right.
well,
March, March 27th, Saturday, is the first Seder. And, the mayor, has canceled everything through the end of March with no gatherings. So it would kind of be silly for us to even think about doing it at that point.
That's true.
And I don't think we're going to be out of the woods by that point.
Now they're saying the end of the summer or maybe September.
Right. So I'm thinking, and we have to do what we have to do, like I said, to stay healthy. So a Seder virtually via Zoom, whatever, isn't the ideal. But I mean, who believed when we did this last year, when we got the call in March that we were shutting down and all of this was starting, that a year later we would still be doing it?
Well, nothing is right.
Right. So.
I mean, even scheduling a vaccination is a big deal. The anxiety here is terrible.
Right, it is. So I don't know, but here we are, a year later, we're still dealing with it. I don't know how long. End of September. I have a feeling that some form of this is going to be with us for a long, long time. Maybe not as severe as it is right now, but something. I don't know whether we're going to have booster shots like we do with flu shots, every year or so. I don't know,
I think people will still catch it, but I think that there's a way of curing, not, helping it run its course, and you're not going to die from it.
Right. I agree. I think that it'll become less severe, and
Thank you. That was a good word.
People will still catch it, people will still have it, but it won't be as severe. It won't be a death sentence or, hospitalization for weeks and weeks on end, and that kind of thing. So I don't know if the Cathys are showing up today or not. I haven't heard from them.
They said they were.
Okay.
Yes.
They said they were when we spoke to them earlier this morning.
Okay.
We ran out, and I don't know where they are.
I mean, it's pretty out. The sun is pretty. It's chilly, but it's pretty outside right now.
Yeah, it's very
gorgeous,
chilly.
but not gorgeous enough to sit out.
No, because I went out on the front porch and I thought, well, maybe I could have a cup of coffee out here, but that didn't last. It was just a little too chilly for that. So.
And how's Caleb?
He is good. See, he has his vaccine already, so he's good because he was in the study. He was in the vaccine study.
Oh, great.
When he went in to have his study unblinded, they said, you got the vaccine. So he is good to go. So that's why I really wanted to get it so that we would both have it,
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Tim,
I mean, they're still going to have him come in every so often to monitor and, check up on everything. So the study isn't over, even though he has been unblinded and told that he has the vaccine. So.
Tim, you taught English?
Yes, I did.
We're part of the Jane Austen book club here.
Oh, good old Jane. I love Jane Austen.
We all did, yeah, or at least the members of the club here do. And but we read not only Jane Austen, of course, we read stories that were written around the same time, or stories.
That era of literature. Yeah,
or even a little later, Dickens and so forth. Sure. What we're reading now is I'm reading it. Jane is not up to it yet. The French Lieutenant's Woman. Have you ever read that?
Well, I read that many years ago.
John Fowles.
I would love to revisit. That's a book I probably should revisit.
Well, if you want to join us for our Zoom meeting that we're going to have, it's going to be in a week from, I think it's a week from today.
What time do you do that?
The Jane Austen meeting. I'll send you I'll call the president of the club and ask him if you can join in. But I've been reading the book, and it is a fascinating book. I mean, we've seen the movie.
Right.
I love the film. The film is somewhat different.
Right.
But the book is absolutely so filled with sidetracks.
Right.
And cliffhangers, and the writing style, I think, is just, to me, so novel and unusual,
Right. As I recall, it flips around in time frames.
Right, you're absolutely right. What he does is he compares 1860s, which is when the book is written, to almost like the 1860s. The book takes place, but the 1960s, which is, so he uses events to compare people, like he'll compare people in the book to Nazis.
Right. I do remember that. I do remember that being, because I know for some people they found that very off-putting. They didn't like that aspect of the book.
Well, the movie is a lot different. I don't know if you've seen the movie with Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep, yes.
Larry, what book are you talking about? Oops, I'm on.
French Lieutenant's Woman.
Ah, yes. Well,
I
Uh,
get started here with our Torah portion of the week because we are moving through Exodus and we are moving into the Torah portion, which takes us close to what ultimately, to many Torah scholars, is sort of the defining moment in Jewish history of the Exodus that will come actually in the portion that follows this one, but we're building toward that, where God will actually speak directly to the Hebrews, to the Israelites, which is sort of what we've been building toward. But in this portion where this is Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 to chapter 17, verse 16, it is in this Torah portion where finally the Pharaoh does relent and he tells the Hebrews that he will allow them to leave Egypt. He's tired of the devastation and now death that has been happening among his people, the outcry. And so as the Hebrews are preparing to leave, and again, there's the question of, did they leave immediately or was there a lapse of time before when they had the permission and then when they left? But they're getting ready to go. And there are enough signs that this is not necessarily going to be an easy journey. The Torah clearly wants to impress upon us with these events that freedom is truly a precious thing, and to achieve freedom is not always going to be an easy thing, even if you happen to have God on your side, because God in this portion has promised them he will guide them. But God does never anywhere in the Torah tell them that this is going to be something that's going to be a walk in the park or a piece of cake. They're happy to, the Hebrews express happiness in leaving slavery, but they're still doubtful. They still express doubts to Moses and even in terms of God that they can fully be trusted to that they will stay out of danger. They're still a little bit leery. And this is fortified when they turn around as they're leaving and they see that Pharaoh has set his men and chariots to try to take them back into bondage. And they right away get very upset, thinking, we thought we were free, that God would be with us. And they have this moment of doubt that, they shouldn't have left, they shouldn't have gone. Moses turns to God, he implores God for help and says, what am I going to do? This is not what you told us was going, or told me was going to happen. And God says, okay, don't worry. The sea is going to part. You're going to cross safely. And then ultimately the waters will return, and that's going to take care of the Egyptians. And that's exactly what does happen. The Hebrews, the Israelites, make it through safely, and then the waters come back and drown Hebrews' men, or Pharaoh's men, and the chariots, and this allows the celebration of the Israelites. And this is where ultimately we get what we call in our service the Micha Mocha, the song at the sea. Interestingly enough, that we, in services, we attribute the Micha Mocha to Miriam. And yes, in the Torah, it does talk about Miriam dancing on the shores of the sea with the women, but the actual song itself in the Torah is attributed more to Moses than it is to Miriam, interestingly enough. Yet we have kind of, given that over to Miriam. And it's interesting that they dance. And once upon a time, according to my reading this week, dance was very much a part of worship. And it was in many peoples that dance would be appropriated into worship. It was only later among most people that dance fell out as a worship mode, not coming back into Judaism until the Hasidim. And as you know, if you've seen, the Hasids will dance around with the Torah and whatever. We kind of do that a little bit when we celebrate Simchat Torah, but it's not really something that we do. I know there are some Christian religions where they will do liturgical dance, interpretive dance up at the front on the altar for certain things, but even that, I know from Christian friends of mine, they're not real comfortable with it. They find it a little bit odd. So who knows if dance will ever come back into services as a style of worship. Not that I would be doing much of it because I'm not very coordinated. But anyway, I digress. So as their journey continues, as they move away from the Reed Sea and they move away from slavery toward freedom, God keeps reminding them that this is something that is important. Freedom is important. It is something to cherish. And he says there's going to be more tests ahead. You know, this is not, you're not out of the woods yet. There's still going to be more ahead. And we know that because we know our Torah. The people are going to get thirsty and they're going to get cranky. They're going to get hungry and they're going to get cranky. They will continue to doubt. There will be moments of doubt where they doubt Moses, where they doubt that God is really with them. And again, we know that this is all coming. Even though God has promised, I'll intervene, I'm going to be there. The people have seen the power of God. They only have to think back to the parting of the sea to know that God was there, God was with them. But that doesn't always allay their doubts, and it doesn't always put aside all of their questions. So as they move away from this, as they finally start to realize that, okay, we're moving toward freedom, we've danced, we have sung, but we still know that there is going to be some problems ahead. So where do we go from here? As they go toward freedom, the Torah kind of, and this is, as I was reading modern commentaries especially, I really kind of focused on some of the modern commentaries for this section. Many rabbinical people who have written from conservative and reform anyway, have looked at this portion and said, this is a portion which calls all of us even today to think about what is freedom worth? What does freedom really cost? What is it really worth to us? How much are we even today willing to sacrifice in order to guarantee our own freedom? Now, if we are to see freedom as something that's truly precious, how do we safeguard it once we have it? How do we avoid taking it for granted? Because I think a lot of us do take it for granted at times. If we've never had to live without freedom, then how do we really completely value it? If we've never really had it threatened to be taken away. I remember a line from To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a great book, where Scout is, remember, if you recall the story, Scout loves to read. And she actually gets in trouble in her school with her teacher because she can read so well. And the teacher says, well, it's my job to teach you how to read. And you've taken my job away from me in essence. And so she tells Scout to go home and tell Atticus, her father, don't read anymore. You're not to read with your father anymore. I don't want you to be reading on your own because I have to teach you how to read. And she makes the comment, Harper Lee's comment in that chapter in the book is kind of the extent of, unless you've had something taken away from you or threatened to be taken away from you, you don't really value it. And the parallel she makes is, you know, one does not love breathing. And we don't love breathing until somebody threatens to take our breath away. Then all of a sudden we really start to love breathing. So if we've never had to be or live without freedom or never had our freedom threatened, do we really understand how precious freedom can be? Do we see the enemies around us who may threaten and want to take our freedom away? And what do we do if we do feel that freedom is threatened? We have fought wars in order to preserve freedom. Men and women have given up their lives in the cause of freedom and liberty. Are the enemies to freedom always obvious? Are they easy to see? Do we know them when they're facing us? Well, I think sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. And this takes me to a little bit with modern technology. Modern technology right now is being looked at sometimes as an enemy to freedom. And why do I say that? Because modern technology sometimes is very much, I don't know if you're on Facebook or any of the other platforms, is very much about trying to kind of control what you see, control what you're exposed to, control what you think. And I'm no Luddite. I'm not going to say, because I mean, I like my modern technology and I am on Facebook. I'm not on everything, but you know, I have friends who live in a lot of places and family who live in a lot of different places. But there is a school of thought among people out there that these social media platforms have way too much control over how we think. And if they're controlling how we think, then are we really free? We don't get opposing viewpoints. I'm going to tell you right now, you know, I have Facebook. It's no secret that I'm pretty much a very liberal, blue state sort of Democrat person. I don't see anything on my Facebook feed that doesn't fall right in to the line of what I think. I'm not exposed to other points of view. I don't know that that's a good thing or a bad thing. They all use algorithms to kind of to control what we see. I do find it fascinating that if I go on Amazon, for example, to look for a pair of blue jeans, then all of a sudden I'm getting ads for blue jeans on my Facebook. How did they know I was on Amazon looking for blue jeans? You know, are we in a state right now with our modern technology where our freedom is being threatened? No, we don't have Pharaoh's armies coming after us. We don't have chariots coming after us, but maybe in a way this is even a little bit more insidious because we don't see it or we're not aware of it, but it's out there. You know, we get this steady diet of what we like, what kind of appeals to us, and yet we're not being exposed to other viewpoints. I mean, I like to discuss, I like to argue, and hearing other points of view, if they're stated rationally, I'm okay with that, but I don't see a whole lot of that going on. I don't want to blanketly condemn modern technology. I don't want to blanketly condemn social media because I think it can be very valuable. As I said, I use it to keep in touch with family. I use it to keep in touch with friends. But I really stopped to think this week as I was reading some of these things is this an enemy to freedom? Is this sort of a modern way rather than a Pharaoh's army that our freedom is being threatened? So while our ancient ancestors had to face, you know, the lack of freedom or the prospect of freedom being taken from it in a very realistic sort of way that they could see and they could see pursuing them, we maybe don't see it quite as readily. And God intervenes and God takes them away and they are able to escape. I just wonder, are we going to be able to also, when we see freedom being threatened, are we going to know enough to stand up and escape what may threaten to take our freedom away? So that's kind of what I was looking at. I just kind of went off on a real tangent when I was looking at these rabbis who were talking about this portion, talking about the precious gift of freedom that we should never take for granted. So there you go.
It's interesting, though, that people take freedom for granted and they can't imagine the other person's viewpoint.
Right.
I find that so amazing that they just do not see. You can't even speak to some people about it.
Right. Oh, you're right. It can be a very, very polarizing sort of thing. And I think that's a point we're at right now in our country where we are very polarized and people can't have rational discussions, serious discussions, informed, and maybe that's the word I want, informed discussions about different points of view without it getting so angry and so heated that is it really worth it? Because nobody's really listening to anybody anymore.
Yeah, well, freedom, I think, is, you know, in the person's mind as to what their freedom is. Like if you talk to a person who is, you know, let's say a Trump supporter, their version of freedom is whatever Trump says is freedom. It leads to more independence. It leads to less government control over our lives. It leads to more, you know,
financial gains.
More financial gains, but also I was going to say more opportunity for guns and, you know, less involvement, you know, those kinds of things. When if you look at the results of some of those thoughts to people that are, let's say, more liberal bent, like most of us here, you know, we see freedom entirely differently. We are willing to sacrifice some of those what they consider to be freedoms for, you know, for safety, for religious freedom, for other kinds of things. I mean, we live in Sun City, and you're not allowed to put more than 4 ornaments on your lawn or something like that. Right. I mean, that's a sense of freedom. You know, people might object to that. You're not supposed to go to the swimming pool, you know, after a certain hour. Why not? You know, I mean, there are all kinds of rules and regulations that you sign up for to be part of society. And I even the Jews, when the Israelites, when they were in the desert, they were, and you see this with a lot of the Russians when they came over. They had no, or even when they were in Russia after the Glasnost, and after Stalin, not Stalin, but after Khrushchev and whoever the last leader was there, Gorbachev. When Gorbachev led them into the the daylight, basically, you see in their eyes they didn't know what to do. The government had provided for them, they had jobs. And all of a sudden now they're out in the cold, and maybe the authoritarian scheme was better for them, they felt. So I think half of the world is under what's called tribal societies. And they believe that, you belong to a tribal society. It's my place in the world, and maybe, I'm not going to be that free, but I don't really care. I mean, some of the happiest people in the world live in Singapore. And they live in those kind of countries compared to, the Western countries where the happiest people seem to live in Scandinavia, based on happiness index. So happiness is in the mind of the beholder.
That's true. I mean,
freedom is in the mind of the beholder.
Right. Well, it is true. I mean, and when you mentioned Singapore, isn't Singapore the country where if you drop a piece of gum or something on the ground, you get some sort of horrible fine, jail?
You get caned. You can get caned.
Exactly.
Yeah, with sugar cane or whatever the canes are that is bamboo.
Right.
But yeah, there are serious fines for those things. But the people say, okay, I'm giving up safety for security.
Right.
Apparently, it's a very low crime rate, and they tell me that I've got to wear a mask. I'm going to wear a mask. It's not like, let's have a discussion about wearing a mask.
Yeah, some people do think it's something we should discuss. I mean, we have a neighbor down the street who absolutely refuses. She prides herself on the fact that she doesn't wear a mask. I go in places, I don't care what the rules are. I don't want to wear a mask. And if they want to throw me out, they can throw me out. And, I stay away from her, she's made it very clear that to her, this is something and she says it is a freedom thing. No one's going to take my freedom away from me. I make choice about my health.
This is always the classic argument, like, oh, I want freedom of speech. I want freedom of speech. So you stand up in the movie theater and shout, fire, fire, and cause a panic and kill a few people. Is that freedom of speech? That was always the classic given at school. It's the same thing with Facebook, really. If you don't like it, and it does have the algorithms, you have the freedom not to click on.
Right. Right.
So you don't have to use it. The argument with Facebook is they were using it also to spread a lot of untruths, let's say. There was a lot of propaganda going on. So Facebook has certain regulations, just like Sun City has regulations. There's always that line between anarchy and freedom. And, what is it? I mean, there were some people who don't want any type of government at all. But we know from past experience that doesn't work either.
No, it doesn't.
The country was founded basically, between the people that wanted a strong central government and the people who, which would control the treasury and and Hamilton's compromise, Department of the Treasury and putting the country's capital in Washington was kind of part of that compromise, and all of the votes that were taken were compromised to put the country together. And I think we're seeing that we went through one civil war and we're going through almost another of that same type now. But the people that are, let's say, on the side of states' rights now seem to be the ones that want the federal government to be stronger. It seems like there's a switch that they've basically now taken the opposite position from which, most of the Republicans would have wanted them to take. This hands-off kind of business. Now they want a stronger, government only for their point of view, only for certain things. So it's an ideological problem. But I think Jeff is totally right. I mean, we turn to different channels occasionally on the TV.
Yeah.
We do look at what the other people are saying, and sometimes we, just shrug our shoulders.
Live in a vacuum.
Yeah, we shrug our shoulders.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I try to also expose myself to, the other point of view. My problem is I want to find someone who is going to give me the other point of view that is at least somewhat rational and logical, and not just a bunch of baseless sort of, accusations or platitudes or whatever you want to call them. And I find it difficult to find sometimes reasonable people who can present their side of the view with a certain amount of logic and facts and whatever.
Well, the Lara Hour, the PBS News, I think, is one of the better ones. Judy Woodruff.
Oh, I love Judy Woodruff.
I think she is absolutely one of the better ones, and I think she does not editorialize too much. I think that she tries to really give both sides the opportunity. And you do see commentators now and then coming on the shows. I think you have to separate what's called news from what's called what's called public entertainment.
Right.
And too much of Fox is public entertainment, and a lot of even the stuff that you see on CNN is public entertainment as well. And there is news in there, but you have to separate the two of them out.
Yeah, I mean, taking it back to freedom, it's like where does one person's freedom stomp on someone else's idea of freedom? And this is the whole idea of talking about living in community. If you're going to live in a community, you're going to have to make compromises because, there are communities where, I would like to paint my house lavender. Well, no, we don't allow that in this community. So you have to live in harmony. And if you just choose to live there, buy property there, buy a home there. Okay, before you buy, look at the rules. And if you don't like them, then I guess you shouldn't buy there. I mean, we lived in a condo in Fort Lauderdale, and it had a lot of rules. There were a lot of regulations, living in a condo. Like you said, when can you go to the pool? What are the hours? Even like if you're moving in or out, there's certain hours where you're allowed to move in, you're allowed to move out, all kinds of things. Well, you look at the rules, and if you can't abide by them, or you think they're going to be, detrimental to your day-to-day living, I guess you need to buy somewhere else. And as every society tries to form a government that will work, I mean, the most efficient form of any government is a dictatorship. I mean, it's very efficient. One person says it, it's the rule, it's the law, you go forward. I mean, you can say it's good, it's efficient. The kind of government we have is not very efficient because, everything that happens in a democracy, a representative democracy, has to be debated. It has to be debated in the House. It has to be debated in the Senate. It has to be compromised between the House and the Senate, then ultimately sent to the president. The president can choose to sign it or veto it or whatever. Nothing happens very rapidly. So it's not efficient. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not very efficient.
Well, it also goes back to a defect in human personality. If you believe in like Maslow hierarchy of needs, when you satisfy, the base of the pyramid has got, you got to eat, you got to breathe, you got to sleep, you got to have a place of shelter. And I think that to extent governs almost the majority of people's lives. It's when you get to the top of the pyramid, in that very narrow part of the pyramid triangle, when you start thinking about, things like, I don't have much to lose. I'm a millionaire now. I could speak out. I don't need Donald Trump anymore. And even so, I'm not in danger of my job. So I don't have to go along with the system. And I think that's where most people, unfortunately, are at the base of the pyramid. And I think there are things to be said for evening out that pyramid, make it more like a rectangle, so to speak, instead of a pyramid, so that you don't have this 1% at the top, controlling 99% of the wealth or whatever it is. And I think, there are, we're living with our past problems.
True. Yes. Well, and now so we've got, if we take this back to the Torah, the Israelites are going to have to try to formulate a society now, and they've got, God on their side, and they've got Moses as a leader right now. But as any leader knows, you're going to make choices and decisions that aren't going to be popular with everybody. That's just part of leadership. I mean, having been a classroom teacher, some of the decisions I would make for how the class was going to be run wasn't going to sit well with every single student sitting there. But you know what? This is how it works. This is how we're going to do it. So any kind of freedom in any society there are going to be people who aren't going to be happy with the way things are done. And they're going to want it to be different. And I guess you can try to change things if you don't like them and do it legally, or I suppose you can do it illegally as well, as we've seen. just on January 6th.
It's interesting that Israel, when it's, was noted for, even though it was a smaller percentage of the population, for the kibbutz system, which was basically an egalitarian system.
Right.
I mean, everybody got the same pay. People had to rotate into their different jobs. Yeah, I guess there were some subspecialties, that people were really trained for. But that was really, so adverse to capitalism. Capitalism was really the opposite, where, so can you have democracy? I mean, this is not a subject we could talk about, and come to a conclusion on, but can you have democracy and still have, this freedom of self-enterprise, or do you have to distribute the wealth? You need some sort of a compromise, the social democracy, like you see a lot of the European countries go for, where the tax rates are much, much higher, and things are kind of evened out a little bit more maybe than in the United States. But the whole concept, and when the Israelites are leaving the desert there, I mean, they're leaving as tribes. They're leaving under this organization that they have a leader, that it's not a classless society that they're going to be formed. Not that they had an idea what society they were going to form, but it's not a classless society. There's nothing really in the 10 Commandments about a classless, or 613, I guess, about a classless society. It's
right.
a way of treating people, but is nothing about, everybody should have the same equal opportunity. I mean, that came, in the Age of Enlightenment. That was so much, much later.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you look at the Torah and you look at, if you look at the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, and then even beyond that to the 613 mitzvot, they really don't get into the whole notion of how we're supposed to govern ourselves. Yes, we are told again several times in the Torah that we need to, treat the stranger well, because we know what it's like to be a stranger. So we welcome them, we take care of them, we try to make them a part of, the greater society. But in terms of setting up a day-to-day structure for how to succeed at living and keeping everybody's needs met, the Torah doesn't give us really much to go on there. And like you said, the idea of everybody having what they need, and the idea of economic parity and whatever is something that would come along a lot later in society. And as you said, some countries have a more of a social democratic system. Even my brother, who lives in Canada, which is not even as much as Europeans, and he's a Canadian citizen. He became a Canadian citizen. I mean, when I look at his healthcare, and I look at what our healthcare system is, and how when my sister-in-law had her children and all of this, it just blows my mind. I think the highest hospital bill my brother has ever had for any kind of procedure or even childbirth, I think was something akin to $75. I get a little jealous, I just have to say, when I talk to him. So, yes.
Well, a few things. One, I'm counting on you to bring dancing back into the prayers.
To bring what back?
Dancing.
Dancing. Oh, dancing.
Yes. No.
I see James behind you. We're all there.
I like to dance, but I'm just not very good at it. I've never been known for being graceful. That's for sure.
Well, join the Hasidic community, Flo. Join the Hasidic community.
Yeah, there we go.
Dance with other ladies.
Yes.
Right. This is it. Tim, one
Yeah.
or two questions. I was teasing you with that. Is this one of the first times in the Torah we talk about freedom?
That we talk that the whole concept of freedom is coming up. I think this is where it may have been hinted at, but this is where it becomes central to the point, especially for the Israelites, for the Hebrews, because they're going to be starting this society out of bondage, out of slavery that they've been in for 420 years. So how many generations have, come and gone who don't know the notion of freedom? So it's starting all over again. It's starting from scratch, because the people who had it prior to slavery are no longer there. They've all passed on.
Is that one of the reasons I remember hearing as a child that we wandered for 40 years? Because this way the slavery generation died, passed on, and those coming into Israel were free. They don't remember how the slave mentality.
Right. When you get to the final when you get to Deuteronomy, and then when you ultimately get to the end of Deuteronomy and Moses' death and his, most of Deuteronomy spends a good deal of time Moses speaking to the people. I mean, Deuteronomy is the idea of the words of Moses. The whole notion is, as he is talking to these people, these are a whole generation of people who don't have a memory of Egypt, who don't have a memory of slavery, who have come of age beyond that. And so as they're ready to go into the promised land, they are going in without a memory of slavery in their past. I mean, they know of it, but they didn't live it. They were not alive then. Now, does that make it easier? I don't know. I don't know if it's easier to set up a free society with people who've never known bondage, never known slavery, or would it be easier with people who knew it and understand we don't want to go back to that? That's a question I can't answer. I don't know.
Where does this portion end? This Torah portion ends?
They are just about to make sure, because it kind of stops right in the middle of one of the chapters. This actually ends as they have started to wander. They are beginning to wander, and just before Moses' wife and children and Moses' father-in-law are going to come in, and they're going to talk about setting up where he can function as a judge. And this is where we're going to have what is known as one of the major revelations, when God is actually going to hand down the 10 Commandments and speak directly to the people.
But this is not the 10 Commandments yet.
No, this is 10 Commandments are the next portion.
Next portion.
Yeah, and that's where God will actually, through the clouds and whatever, I mean, the people gathered there are, if we go with the words of the Torah, actually are hearing the voice of God as they stand there.
Now we know that, every Jewish community reads the same Torah portion every week.
Right.
But I mean, from the same Torah, but they have the triennial readings now, right?
Yes, they do.
Does every community pick the portion they want, or are they on a different triennial scale? I was wondering, or in other words, are we, let's say our congregation, do we say, okay, read the second of the third? Triennial means 3, right? So
Right.
You break it up into 3 portions. So does every congregation now on the same schedule? I was wondering.
I don't think so. I mean, there may be one that's out there that kind of is maybe suggested by the URJ or by the CCAR, but I still keep in close contact with my synagogue in Ohio, and I look at their bulletin, and I look at the rabbis' sort of commentary on different Torah portions and whatever, and it doesn't always mesh with what we're doing.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I've seen the same thing, and I thought that part of the appeal of Judaism was that everybody was on the same schedule, but now it seems like the triennial readings kind of messed that up a little bit.
Well, that's because, Larry, you're supposed to have the Torah read 3 times a week, on
Right.
Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.
Right.
And if you don't, you're not at the same place as the other people.
Oh, so it's really not triennial. It's not triennial then in the sense, if you do it that way, because then you're completing the entire reading within
And
1
that's
year.
when you have Simchas Torah.
Right. But I think this is also, I think what happens on a Saturday service, especially in a Reform congregation, is the rabbi, when, he's or she is getting ready to, read the Torah or chant the Torah and then do a Devar Torah, a sermon, I think oftentimes they go with what seems to be appropriate to their congregation or appropriate to what's going on at the time or something, and work from there. I think there's a lot of latitude for Reform rabbis to sort of pick and choose where, so we're in one portion, but which 10, 15 verses do I want to pull out of this portion? I think any rabbi, at least in Reform Judaism, has a great deal of latitude to say, I want to do the first 15 verses, or I'm going to do the 15 here in the middle, or I want to go toward the end and do the 15 toward the end. I don't think it's really, really that prescribed for them.
Yeah. In our next Wednesday class, maybe I'll raise the question to Rabbi Haas and see how he approaches it.
Right. I mean, I know that,
Also, Tim, depending upon if you're Orthodox, conservative, or Reform,
Right,
the amount of lines that you read,
right,
even though you're saying triennial, it's not the same amount because you can have 7 Aliyahs.
right, Right.
And here we have 2 Aliyahs
Right.
in McFisrael.
right. Yeah, I mean, when we weekly at services, a very small portion of the portion, a very small piece of the portion is actually being read, in Hebrew and then also in English. I mean, we've extracted, we've got these Torah portions that are sometimes 3 full chapters long in the Torah, and we're only pulling out from one of those 3 chapters in the Torah portion 12, 15 lines that are going to be read in Hebrew, read in English, and then ultimately it's probably from there where the rabbi then builds his Devar Torah or his sermon. I mean, the one thing that seems to strike me from what I know, and again, I'm not a rabbi, so the rabbi would know better than I do, but I just think that Reform rabbis, and it may be a little different conservative, and I'm probably as different Orthodox, have a great deal of latitude, for their own particular congregations. And that's kind of a hallmark of Reform Judaism.
It's a little strange because as far as the relationship between the Haftorah then is pretty standardized.
Right.
In that there's no triennial Haftorah,
No.
or on special occasions, obviously they insert a different Haftorah, but in general, so the Haftorah usually lines up with a particular portion of the Torah.
Right.
But if you're reading it triennially, the Haftorah could be saying one thing, and you're saying, where did that come from? I thought it's supposed to align with it, or, but yet it doesn't because it's, it's the second part of the triennial or something.
Well, and I have read things from rabbis who, you're supposed to see the connection between the Torah and then the Haftorah reading and whatever. There's supposed to be thematically or something, a connection between the two. And I've actually seen rabbis say, you really have to stretch. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out exactly what is that connection. I've often thought, we, especially maybe it's not the same in Orthodox synagogue or Orthodox congregation, but I really think that in Reform, we give, sort of short shrift to the Haftarah. We don't really talk about it much. We don't really spend much time studying it. I don't think that the majority of people have a great deal of knowledge of the prophets. I don't know that much, I'll be honest. And I've often thought it would be interesting to do a Haftarah study sort of thing, to look at, okay, let's look at the prophets and what they're saying and what, they were giving us, because I think it's something that's just sort of, it's there, but I don't think we really talk about it very much. And I don't really think we study it very much.
I think it became excuse me, I'm sorry, Jeff. I think it became the domain really for the bar and bar mitzvah boy or girl, that was their part, that somehow it got relegated to them, to do the Haftorah rather than the complete Torah portion.
Right.
And they usually even, made their speech basically about the Haftorah portion.
Right.
More than anything else.
Well, and in Orthodox, and I think in conservative as well, young women were not allowed to read Torah and maybe commentary on the Torah. I think conservative, that's no longer true. I think it may still be true in Orthodoxy. And so, because I know even Jennifer, at the synagogue was raised in a conservative congregation, and she says, I was not allowed to chant Torah. I was not allowed to, so I chanted Haftarah and did everything based on the Haftarah portion for the week.
Right.
So, it's interesting because I often feel like, like I said, I don't know that much about it. And I've often felt like it's something I would kind of like to look at more because I don't think we really deal a whole lot with Haftarah. Well, you know how we started reading Haftarah anyway.
No.
It was a hidden message.
The history of Haftarah actually is how it even came into the service was we're going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Oftentimes, one of the ways to oppress Jews in different communities was to forbid the reading of the Torah. The Torah couldn't be read. They wouldn't allow it. So the rabbi said, okay, then we'll go to the prophets and we'll read from the prophets, which of course is what comprises the Haftarah readings. And thereby because they're supposed to be related to the Torah, we're still getting the message of the Torah out, but yet we're not reading, we're not chanting Torah, we're chanting Haftarah. Well, when the Torah readings were put back in, it was a tradition to have the Haftarah portion being read or chanted, and so it just stayed along with the Torah portion. So now we get both. We have a Torah portion and we have a Haftarah portion.
And when did that start? I'm sorry, I missed that.
When did they start doing both?
Yeah.
Well, it was whenever
Torah reading. I'm sorry.
So the Haftarah was in different places, communities where, you know, there was oppression of Jews, anti-Semitism, and they would forbid the reading of the Torah. So they would read the Haftarah instead, read from the prophets.
Okay.
And then when they were allowed again to read Torah, when things lightened up, or the government changed, anti-Semitism, the Enlightenment, whatever, well, we now had been chanting and reading Haftarah, so we put the Torah back in, but we didn't take the Haftarah out. We just kept it there too.
Yeah, it's interesting they standardized it throughout all of the liturgy, though, you know, so that there was a specific Haftorah assigned to, you know, the week, you
Right.
know, so that you couldn't pick your own Haftorah, your own part of what the prophet said, you know.
Right.
So there must have been some committee that got together and said, okay, for, you know, for Exodus, paragraph such and such, this Haftorah seems to be, who wants that one? You know, I'll vote for that one.
It'd be the rabbinic, you know, highfalutin committee. Yes, Floss?
Let my husband talk, then I'll talk. Go ahead.
No, no,
To ask a
it's a
question.
question I had before. I didn't quite understand. When did, you mentioned dance was part of the original services. When did that practice stop?
It seems to be what I could find was that once we no longer had the temple, when we still had the temple in Jerusalem, there were elements of dance that were part of worship. Once the temple was destroyed, the second temple was destroyed, and we then moved toward the synagogue and rabbinic Judaism.
So 70.
We had a prayer
70.
service, and it seemed to have fallen away at that point.
Dance and music went out of the temple and it became
Right.
more rabbinical Judaism then.
Right, right.
Tim,
Yeah.
you're saying that the women danced with the women and the men. Is that it? I mean,
Well, that's what Orthodoxy does now. Was that the case when we had, I'm assuming it probably was in Temple Judaism, but I don't really know.
okay. Two other quick questions. Devar Torah, what does that exactly mean?
Devar means word. So Devar Torah is a word of Torah. It means you're going to expound on some piece of the Torah, but actually, because Devarim is words and the Devar is words. So when you say a Devar Torah, it's a word of Torah, which is a way of talking about a commentary.
When the rabbi or someone would take the portion of the week and put it into, let's say, simplified language. Is that
Right. And a lesson to try to derive a lesson from the Torah portion that is pertinent to the people, to the congregation. And as anybody can write a Devar Torah. I mean, it doesn't have to be a rabbi, it doesn't have to be a cantor. I mean, it's just a matter of taking the portion, digging in and finding what they call in writing, in what I used to teach my students, is a hook. Find your hook. What in the Torah portion is your hook that you want to expound upon and then bring to the congregation as some form of lesson or ethics, principles, morals, whatever. And it's an exercise in mind, use your mind. How can I make connections here? What from this ancient source, how can I connect it to, a Devar Torah for a congregation in the year 2021?
How and when did an Aliyah come into the service?
Well, that would have had to come, when we started putting the prayer service together and how it actually came about, I don't know. But when we no longer had a temple and we were meeting with synagogues and rabbinic Judaism, which would take, it didn't just happen. It took different forms at different times. At some point, the idea of an Aliyah, someone to come up and chant the Torah and have the blessings and whatever, came in as part of the service. They still.
I don't want to be cynical, but I think it also came about as a fundraiser. And my grandfather's synagogue, they were bid on the different aliyahs, and especially for a different holiday, they can get the bidding up substantially, so that it was an honor, to get a particular aliyah for a particular service. For the 10 Commandments might have cost $25, whereas,
I'm more
you know,
socialist.
yeah, for Deuteronomy, maybe, $15 or something.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
third,
I,
yeah.
that's
But
true.
also they reserved it. I mean, it was a classist kind of thing in that they started, not only did they have Aliyahs, they had to be a certain person who could get the first or second.
Right.
So there was this notion, at least, that certain people were, I hate the word to use the words, but closer to God or more deserving of being called up first,
The
or
one
paying
thing
reference to them.
The one thing we do know, I mean, and this is not just in Judaism, but I think religious institutions in general, because this would include churches and things of that sort, can find ways to raise money if they need to. And if that means, you put an Aliyah up for bid, or whatever. And I have very good friends who are Episcopalian, and they different things that the Episcopalians would do in order to raise money. We have the plaques on the pews at Mikveh Israel, and everything in a lot of Episcopalian churches have plaques for, this kind of donation and that kind of donation and whatever. I mean, I think it's just, we had to support our religious institutions in whatever way we could.
Well, I know Mikveh Israel during the high holidays, you can't sit in certain rows because
Right.
somebody owns them. It's their
Yes.
row.
Yes.
And that was the first time I ever heard of that, to be very honest.
Well, it's a very old congregation. I don't see it in, more modern synagogues that I've been in. I don't see plaques on the rows of seats. So I don't know that has carried through. But as we know, we're in a historic building with a historic congregation and families that date back to, 1733. So maybe that's a difference there too.
Tim, when you're
Yeah.
talking about the Aliyah, then the highest, quote, honor of an Aliyah is the first or second?
First, general.
You mean, is it, so if you're going to have 7 aliyot in a service, is it more of an honor to do the first one as opposed to the 7th one? That I don't know. That's a good question. That's a rabbi question. Whether you want to be first or last,
I think the congregation, the ritual committee kind of decides. I think the congregation kind of generally, if it's a bar mitzvah, they generally want the honor to go. The last part of it goes to the bar mitzvah boy or girl, bar mitzvah, because that leads into them doing the haftorah. So they usually get the last Torah portion, as I recall. But the first and second, they would have to get a Kohen or a Levite. So if they don't have a family member, they might have to drag somebody in, who's a friend of the family, or even if it's not part of the bar mitzvah. But I think in general, the bar mitzvah was,
it's subscribed to an effect.
I'm thinking as a joke how they have that term, a Shabbat goy, who could light your lights or light the cooking.
These are not toys to be called up. These obviously are people,
Finish. Someone could have a job of being a professional Kohanim. When they need a Kohanim at a service, that would be his job, a little extra money he can bring in.
Well, not only his job, I remember, in synagogues in Brooklyn where we had a lot of these storefront synagogues, and in the morning, if somebody had to say Kaddish, you would run out looking for a Kohen, if it was on a Thursday, or something, not only look for the 10th man, but you'd look for someone of a specific class in order to open the Torah or to be called up to read the Torah, things like that. So yeah, you're right.
From what I understand, that still happens.
You didn't pay him. It had to be of his goodwill, obviously.
Maybe buy a brisket or a challah, not with money.
See, if you're a cantor and you are a Kohanim, I'm going, boy, that's a double blessing, because then you can be called up all the time in case of, a need.
Right.
Not only can you read the Torah, you could read, first or maybe not second, but.
In fact, that's a good question, Larry, a lead-in. When did a cantor come into the service? When the rabbi couldn't sing?
Actually, I think it was when you didn't have someone to lead a service, didn't have to be a cantor, but I lost my train of thought. It's nice to have a cantor because you have the music as well, but you know, it's somewhat, most of the people at the time could not read.
Right.
They had to have someone who could read and teach that way.
And the cantor, initially, when you go back to the beginning of cantors and their role in the synagogue, the cantor was technically the representative of the people, There's a Hebrew term for it, which escapes me right now. But I'll think of it at the most, probably an hour from now. But that was the role of the cantor as well, not just to chant and sing and whatever, but actually the cantor was the people's representative on the bima. Because as Jane said, a lot of them could not follow with the Hebrew. A lot of them could not, chant, some maybe couldn't read, whatever. So that was the job of the cantor, to really be the people's voice. And then ultimately it sort of evolved into being the musical leader in terms of leading the chanting, leading the singing, etc. In Reform, I don't know if it's true necessarily in the other branches of Judaism, but in Reform Judaism, everything a rabbi can do, a cantor can do. There's no strong delineation of, well, a rabbi can do this, but a cantor can do this, but a cantor can't do that. There are some congregations that their leader is a cantor. They don't have a rabbi, and all they have is a cantor, at the leadership, spiritual leadership.
Back in Parsippany, we used to have a ranter, an R-A-N-T-E-R, a rabbi cantor, and he had a good voice, Rabbi Franzel.
And terrific voice.
He was all in one package so that it was, economical.
Right. Well,
a rabbi who had a good voice, who could sing, and he loved to sing anyway.
Central Synagogue in New York, Rabbi Bookdahl, she was a cantor first. She graduated from the School of Cantorial Music, the Reform School, then went back and got her rabbinical degree.
Yeah, we had that as well in Parsippany as well.
I mean, that is nice. You get both for the price of one. I don't know.
Cantor, the woman cantor there.
Ina.
With the beautiful voice, yeah.
They would never make me a cantor, trust me. No. In fact, if I went to try to apply, they'd throw me out. They'd say, no, you're not going to do it.
Speaking of cantors, did anybody listen in last night to the Debbie Friedman concert? Yeah. What did you think? Did you see that, Tim, at all, or no? The HUC had a tribute, I guess it would be called, to Debbie Friedman and her music. What did you think, Flo?
It was her 10th anniversary.
And how they were talking that it was not easy for her to make inroads, and what she went through till she was recognized. And I thought some of the songs I've never heard. I like the Latka song. Remember the
that was upbeat,
Latka song?
Yeah. Well, yeah, she was, brought that upbeat, sort of positive, very energetic kind of music into the service. And that hadn't been done, and it being a woman as well, So she really paved, a way here for a change in service music and representative of women as service leaders, etc. At a time when that still wasn't the norm,
Right. Well, she also said, if I'm not mistaken, Larry and Jane, you heard that she sat in the temple and just felt it was there. It wasn't reaching me. Am I right?
Yeah, she spiritually,
things to bring people in, make them inclusive. And like the Misha Barak, to me, I always remember hearing, I always thought it was wonderful, that prayer, and hear how, was there a Misha Barak, but she made it into the musical version, Tim?
Right, she was the one the one we're so familiar with, that we sing so often. It made it was easy for people to sing with and easy to be part of it, rather than just the rabbi reciting or the cantor singing or reciting, something that the people could easily. I mean, if you look at her melodies, by and large, they're so easy to catch on to. They're so easy to grasp that they pull you in, and then it makes you a part of the service, because it's not hard to sing with her melodies. That's what she wanted to do. She wanted to create something that was beautiful, but also it's not going to take you forever to learn this. I'm not trying to really do that. I want to make it so you can learn it, sing it, and be a part of it as quickly as possible.
What did you think, Jane and Larry, of it last night?
I thought some of it was very good. I thought some of it was very I had been to one of her services in New Jersey. And I felt the same way, that I felt excluded in some parts because her melodies and she took songs from portions that were not necessarily something I was familiar with. And so I was sitting there some of the time saying, whereas if you go to a service every single week that has the musical version of songs, you're able to get it. I know Kelly is fantastic. I mean,
Yes.
and she hasn't changed the tunes so much that you can't recognize them or can't try to sing along. So I have mixed feelings, but I do love her Mishaberach, and I do love her Lechila, and stuff like that. But I am familiar with that because that's what we used to sing like in Pinebrook.
Yes.
Nice.
So, you know, those and the one that she ends with, and I can't think of the name of that.
Well, she does the one with Miriam also with the
Right, yeah.
timbrel and the, you know,
Right.
on.
So those are,
crossing the
that
Red
what I
Sea,
was
yeah.
familiar with, I really felt at home with. Those that I was not familiar with, I said, okay, they didn't explain to me where it came from.
As a program, I didn't think it was all that wonderful. That was my comment. I think that, you know, it just didn't flow well together. I thought that some of the people were a little wordy and some of the people were a little over dramatic, and some of the singers, I didn't think, you know, I just didn't get a good feeling, and it's hard to do it on Zoom. So that was part of the problem. I didn't think they had a good format, and it just didn't flow together well.
Zoom is not very music friendly. It just really is.
It takes a lot of practice, and I don't think they were ready for prime time. I hate to say it. You know, I was, you know, I had realized that a while back that they had renamed or called the music school, you know, the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music or whatever they call it. I didn't realize it was in New York, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's in New York City, yeah, which is where they had the program from. I don't know if you might remember Flo and Jeff, because you were on the program that I did on Leonard Bernstein the other week, a couple of weeks ago, and I talked there about Bernstein got commissioned by a cantor from the Park Avenue Synagogue called Putterman, I think was his name, and he had commissioned for about 25 years. He apparently was a very wealthy synagogue, and they gave him, you know, funds. He had commissioned major composers and also some unknown composers to write liturgical music. And one of his commissions was the Hashkivenu that Bernstein wrote, you know, for the synagogue there. But his thinking at the time was that, you know, people should go to the synagogue to be uplifted by the music. And just like the ritual of the prayer book and things like that have changed over the years, the music should change as well, but not necessarily replace it. It should be added to it, and, you know, a combination of the, you know, he wasn't looking as an overthrow kind of thing. So it would be interesting one of these days, I would think, for somebody to do a musical program of many of the composers that he had done over the 30 or so years that he had these commissions, you know, and see, you know, if any of it is still alive and still wonderful music, because most of it is just not even played in most of the synagogues.
Right.
Some of the Portuguese synagogues, say it again.
It's so nice of you to volunteer to do it.
Yeah, no, I don't have the musical background, and I don't even know if they're all available. I mean, you'd have to have archives, you know, you have to be an archivist and delve into it and things like this, but there must be a treasure trove of music that has been written, you know, for this. I recently sent out a copy of a link to the Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen Hallelujah. I don't know if you got that one to our CMI group. This was the girl who was singing it. The woman who sings it was supposed to, she had a gig at the Bremen Museum that was canceled. So I went on that just to see, you know, when they were going to reschedule it, if they had, and they have not yet. But I went to a couple of her websites, and she does a beautiful job of the, you know, the Leonard Cohen, the Hallelujah, which I think is so spiritual. But we never sing it in the synagogue. We never sing that in the synagogue, but
Did
it's
you know
just,
that there's actually a Lachado D done to that melody?
oh, is there? Yeah.
It's the Hallelujah melody from Leonard Cohen, but it's actually Lachado D. It's
Oh.
beautiful. It's actually beautiful. All right, I got to go, people, because I'm going to get my COVID vaccine.
Oh, go right ahead. Good luck.
And I'm all excited about that. So I never thought I'd be excited about getting a shot, but I am.
Okay. So good luck to you, Flo. I hope you get yours soon, your appointment.
We're going to Sam's. Do you need anything?
No, thank you.
Did I have a COVID?
COVID,
They have a COVID, but we don't want it.
Oh, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All
Love
right, have a good weekend. Shabbat shalom.